We are back on the Alex Jones Show in the second half of the third hour. Coming up tonight, of course, is the InfoWars Nightly News. That's at InfoWarsNews.com. And don't forget the November 3rd Money Bomb. You heard Alex earlier talking about what it takes to expand, how we need more people to make sure we're reaching the people we need to reach, the mass audience, with this message, this important message, as they continue to ramp up the bread and circuses, to ramp up all these distracting sports, all these TV shows, 3D movies, and the rest of it. We need to break through and let people know what's going on so they can turn away from this as this entire economic collapse is upon us. But we're joined now by InfoWars writer Patrick Henningsen. He's also a geopolitical analyst. He's been following Syria closely, and we've seen a talking point that Syria is next immediately on the heels of Gaddafi's exit, his death. And so, Patrick, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much, Aaron.
Break down what you've seen with Syria, because you told me the other day you saw even rebels who were discussing how Syria is next.
Yeah. I mean, I was absolutely shocked, Aaron. I was watching the BBC news, the BBC Nightly News. I think it was at 6 p.m. It was the 6 o'clock news on Friday. And there was an aerial shot of the charred remains of Gaddafi's convoy, which was hit, I believe, by a French tornado in a NATO airstrike. And you could just see burnt out cars. And there were some rebels there, one rebel in particular. And it was a very quick shot. And I was shocked to see this. On the back of his camo kind of flak jacket he had on in red letters. And I call to any viewers out there who can track down this clip to try to find it. I haven't had any luck of finding it, but back of this guy's jacket in red letters said, "Syria, here we come." Okay, so that is an absolute in-your-face admission, really, on the part of this transnational council. And it never dawned on me to even pay attention, but I was looking at the interviews with these so-called rebel fighters, and I've lived and worked in the Middle East. I've lived and worked in Saudi Arabia in the past, and also in Lebanon, and I'm very familiar with the different types of Arab facial features and backgrounds and even accents. And a lot of these guys, there's no way they're from Libya. They look like a lot of them are from Saudi, a few Pakistani, Afghanistan, and Iraq, possibly, and Egypt and stuff like that. So many of these rebel fighters, they're not even from Libya. So try to explain that. I asked David Cameron and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, try to explain to me how all these non-Libyan rebels have ended up in Libya. And we know there are a lot of Al-Qaeda fighters that have been flown in for this job. These same guys, they're going to fly in to finish off Syria. The groundwork for Syria has already been laid by the Syrian ambassador, U.S. ambassador in Damascus. His name's Robert Ford. And if you're not familiar with Robert Ford was John Negroponte's #2 guy in Baghdad under the Provisional Coalition Authority. Now, right about the time Negroponte dropped in as ambassador in Iraq, you started having all these death squads popping up, Shiite death squads and things like this, kidnapping people, shooting people all around Iraq, marauding gangs. And of course, John Negroponte is the architect of the Central American death squads and the School for the Americas based in Georgia, and all the operations that came out of that kind of quasi-military intelligence university in America that used to train Central American, South American terrorists. Now, Negroponte's #2 guy is Ford. He was the right man for the job, obviously. As soon as he arrived in Syria, we started seeing armed insurrection in different parts of Syria. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going on there. And this is not a grassroots hippie peace movement in Syria by any means, exactly like it wasn't in Libya. This is planned. These are timed. The Arab Spring from Tunisia to Egypt to Libya and next to Syria. These are all carefully coordinated and been planned years in advance.
That's what I mean, Patrick. I mean, they try to tell us that this is 1776 when it's nothing of the kind. We were just talking earlier with Alex about the demonization of 1776, trying to say Thomas Jefferson's Constitution, his Declaration of Independence, was illegal somehow. And yet we're supposed to go along and happily support supposed democracy movements in the Middle East that are just smokescreens for this aggressive U.S. foreign policy. This is not our country. It may be under the name of U.S., Patrick. And we know they've just brought in Islamic Sharia law in Libya, even as they use this propaganda to say, well, they need to have women's liberation over there, and, you know, the women don't want to have the things on their faces and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got, of course, you're going to get a pro-Sharia law government installed in Libya. This is always the way it goes. Anytime, and probably throughout history, okay, anytime the U.S. gets involved, either by applying external pressure on a country, and I got many examples that I can tell you for that, or is involved, militarily, or aiding or giving aid to some side of some kind of rebellion, you almost always get an extremist, a more extremist culture wake of that. Now, look, Iran is a perfect example. Your viewers know, and it's been documented in Alex's films. Mohammad Mossadegh, Iran in the 50s. This was a country where you go out into the streets of Tehran and you see most guys wearing gray suits, trilby hats, carrying briefcases. Very secular society. On its way to becoming an advanced secular society. And of course, anytime you see this, and this is the same throughout Africa in the 50s and 60s, you look at some of these cities that really had their glory days in the 50s and 60s, a lot of newly won independence and so forth. And then comes the West, then comes the CIA, who want to basically smash these countries into submission and prepare them to become debt slaves to the IMF and that cartel of banks that gives out, foreign aid to these sort of countries. Gaddafi was off the reservation completely. He was running a completely solvent country, had, spending money on everything from healthcare. They had the lowest infant mortality rate in Africa, longest life expectancy in Africa, had a British-style NHS healthcare system. You get interest-free loan if you want to buy a house. If you get married, they give you $10,000 or something like that, and $5,000 for each kid. I can't remember the exact statistics, but do you think that the people of Libya are going to get that standard of living back? Do you think that they're going to have stability within their country, domestic stability? We're talking about in the national interests of Libyans, not in the United States' national interest.
But Patrick, we know this global empire is about disrupting stability. It's about undermining that, controlling through chaos, and it's about the grand chessboard, as Brzezinski calls it, and the rest of it.
Yes.
But I want to make sure people know that this is a talking point that has been orchestrated as if in a symphony without missing a beat immediately on the heels of Gaddafi's death. CNN headline, Syria, Yemen opposition warn their dictators, you are next. You also have Senator Marco Rubio of Florida mouthing off that, hey, you're next, buddy, to Assad. We have McCain talking about military options in Syria. Whatever you think about these people individually, this is a coordinated message that they're going to just move on down the map, Patrick.
Absolutely. I mean, look, General Wesley Clark gave an interview a few years ago. I believe it was in 2009 or 2008. He was actually in the Pentagon or in the State Department, and he saw the memo back in 2002, and it was a 4 or 5 step plan. They're going to take down Iraq first, then they're going to take down a series of countries, which included Syria and Lebanon, and finishing off with Iran. Okay, so this has obviously been on the board for a long time. They're getting a bit confident.
Patrick, I know a lot of the listeners know what you're talking about, longtime listeners, but new listeners won't believe it. We have that clip ready to go right now. I had the same thing in my stack, and Kurt and Emma wrote about it back in September 2011. Libya and Syria, the neocon plan to attack 7 countries in 5 years. Obviously, the timetable's not accurate, but let's cue that clip now. Wesley Clark.
And then we attacked Afghanistan. I was pretty happy about that. We should have. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office. It says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. He was about to show it to me. He said, because I want to talk about it. And I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this, I couldn't begin to talk about it. And I couldn't believe it would really be true, but that's actually what happened. These people took control of the policy in the United States. And I realized then, it came back to me, a 1991 meeting I had with Paul Wolfowitz. You know, in 2001 he was Deputy Secretary of Defense, but in 1991 he was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. It's the number 3 position in the Pentagon. And I had gone to see him when I was a 1-star general. I was commanding the National Training Center. I had met him one time. He said, if you ever get to Washington, come look me up. They always say that. Well, I was there in Washington. It was a Friday afternoon. I'd visited Colin Powell. He'd given me 5 minutes of his precious time and sent me on my way, and I was bored in the Pentagon, and I thought, I'll just go, who can I see? I think I'll see Wolfowitz. So I called, and up there, he was available. Scooter Libby came to the door. I met Scooter for the first time, and he brought me in, and I said to Paul, I said, and this is 1991, I said, Mr. Secretary, you must be pretty happy with the performance of the troops in Desert Storm. And he said, well, yeah, he said, but not really. He said, because the truth is we should have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein, and we didn't. And this was just after the Shia uprising.
There's more of the clip, of course, and he goes on to say how Paul Wolfowitz told him they were going to go to war with Iraq only 10 days after 9/11 for no good reason. And obviously, Wolfowitz was part of so much from Project for a New American Century on down, and they are seeking a global empire.